Welcome to Panic Peak, and thank you for watching. Story 1. The Party That Never Ended. We had all heard the rumors about the old mansion on the outskirts of town, how it was cursed, how people who spent the night there never came back. But like the idiots we were, we laughed it off. It was Halloween, after all, and we wanted a thrill. So, I gathered with my closest friends, Sarah, Tom, Jenna, and Mike, and we made our way out there with a cooler of drinks, a Bluetooth speaker, and costumes that felt ridiculous once we were inside the crumbling, decaying walls of the old house. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and rot, but we ignored it, cranking up the music and dancing as though we could drown out the oppressive silence of the place. We poured drinks, told ghost stories, and settled into the party mood. For a while, it felt normal. Fun, even. But then the lights flickered. "Old wiring," Mike said, shrugging it off as he tossed back another drink. I wanted to believe him, but something about the way the shadows moved when the lights flickered sent a chill down my spine. Outside, the wind picked up, howling through the broken windows like a warning. We ignored that, too. It started with Sarah. She had been laughing, joking about how this house was too creepy even for Halloween, when she suddenly got up to go to the bathroom. "Don't go alone," Jenna teased, but Sarah waved her off. Minutes passed. Then 10. Then 15. "Sarah?" I called out, but there was no answer. We all started to get uneasy. Mike went to check on her, but when he reached the bathroom door, it was locked. "Sarah, open up," he yelled, pounding on the door. No response. He tried the handle again, and this time it clicked open. Inside, the room was empty. The mirror above the sink had a long, jagged crack down the middle, as if someone had punched it in a fit of rage. But Sarah was gone, without a trace. "What the hell?" Tom muttered, backing out of the room. We all gathered in the hallway, staring at the broken mirror, a heavy feeling settling in our chests. "We need to find her," Jenna said, her voice shaking. "Maybe she's messing with us." But as we searched the house, calling Sarah's name, there was no sign of her. It was like she had vanished into thin air. An hour passed, and we were all on edge. The music had stopped. The house was dead silent, except for the occasional groan of the old floorboards. I could feel it in the air. Something wasn't right. Something was watching us. Then it was Tom. 1 second he was with us, pacing back and forth, talking about how this was some kind of sick prank, and the next, he was gone. Just like Sarah. He had walked into the next room to grab his phone, and when we followed, the room was empty. But his reflection was still in the cracked mirror on the wall, staring back at us. I swear I saw his reflection move, even though he wasn't there. We were terrified now. Mike tried the front door, but it wouldn't open. Jenna started sobbing, insisting we had to leave, but every door we tried was locked. Every window was sealed shut. And then we saw them, the shadowy figures. They stood at the edges of the room, barely visible in the flickering light. At first, I thought they were just tricks of the shadows, but they began to move, slowly advancing toward us. They were dressed in old-fashioned costumes, their faces pale and blank. No eyes. No mouths. Just empty, expressionless masks of skin. We backed into a corner, huddled together, too scared to move. But as they closed in, I felt a cold grip on my arm, and when I turned to look, Jenna was gone, replaced by one of them, a featureless face staring back at me. Her body had been swallowed by the dark figures, and I could hear her voice faintly, like she was calling to me from far away. One by one, my friends were taken. The shadowy figures pulled them into the darkness, leaving only their reflections behind in the cracked mirrors. Their voices echoed through the halls, twisted and distant, like they were trapped somewhere I couldn't reach. I was the last one left. I could hear them, feel their presence all around me, but I couldn't see them anymore. The mirrors were everywhere now, covering the walls, the ceilings, the floors. And in each one, I saw my friends, trapped behind the glass, their faces frozen in silent screams. The music started again, but it wasn't the same. It was warped, distorted, like it was coming from another world. I ran for the front door, but when I looked in the mirror by the entrance, I saw my reflection standing still. Watching. Smiling. I knew then that I wasn't going to make it out. The party wasn't over. It would never be over. We were part of it now, trapped in the endless night, our reflections doomed to dance forever in the cracked, broken mirrors. End of the story. Story 2. The Masked Ones. The Halloween party was legendary, an invite-only event hosted at a mansion deep in the woods. No one really knew the host, but the promise of an unforgettable night was too tempting to resist. My friends and I had spent weeks preparing, each of us picking out the perfect costume. I went as a vampire, Jenna as a witch, Tom as a devil, and Mike as a zombie. The night was supposed to be fun, just drinks, music, and an excuse to show off our costumes. But from the moment we stepped into the mansion, something felt off. The first thing I noticed was the masks. The other guests were all wearing elaborate, unsettling masks. Some were animal faces, foxes, wolves, owls, while others were more abstract, twisted versions of human expressions. Some were smiling, but the smiles were too wide, too sharp. Others had grotesque, gaping mouths or hollow eyes. The masks weren't like anything I'd ever seen before, not the cheap plastic kind you could buy at a party store. They looked handmade, too realistic, almost like they were alive. Kind of creepy, huh? Jenna whispered to me, but we all brushed it off. It was Halloween, after all. As the night went on, the atmosphere grew stranger. The mansion was massive, with room after room decorated with eerie precision, cobwebs draped over old portraits, candles flickering in the dark, and the faint scent of incense hanging in the air. But it wasn't just the setting that was unsettling, it was the people. No one spoke. The masked guests moved in silence, gliding through the rooms like they were in a trance. Occasionally, they would stop and stare, their empty eyes fixed on us from behind their masks. At first, we laughed it off, thinking it was just part of the ambience. But as the night wore on, the feeling of being watched became unbearable. Every time I turned around, there they were, standing just a little too close, their blank faces staring. We tried to mingle, but it was impossible. The guests didn't respond, didn't acknowledge us at all. When I tried to strike up a conversation with a woman in a bird mask, she simply turned her head slowly and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. Eric was the first to change. He had wandered off to get more drinks, but when he came back, he was different. His costume, a cheap skeleton outfit, seemed to cling to his skin like it had fused with his body. His face, which had been painted with white and black makeup to look like a skull, looked real. His eyes were vacant, and when I tried to talk to him, he just stared past me. "Eric, are you okay?" I asked, but he didn't answer. His mask, if it was a mask, had melded with his face, and it didn't come off. Then it was Jenna. She had gone to the bathroom, but when she came back, she was wearing a different mask. A grotesque cat face that looked almost alive. Her eyes were dull, and she moved stiffly, like a puppet being controlled by invisible strings. "Jenna?" I called out, but she didn't respond. Her smile was too wide, her movements too mechanical. I started to panic. Something was wrong with this place, with these people. I tried to gather everyone to leave, but it was too late. Mike and Tom had both disappeared into the crowd of masked guests, and when I finally found them, they were wearing masks too, horrible, distorted versions of their faces. I grabbed Mike by the shoulders, shaking him. "Snap out of it, man. We need to leave." He didn't react. His mask, a twisted version of the zombie makeup he'd worn, seemed to be a part of him now, his eyes glazed over, unseeing. I ran for the door, but it wouldn't open. None of the windows would budge either. The music had shifted into something slow and sinister, a melody that felt like it was seeping into my bones. That's when I realized, the masks weren't costumes. They were alive, somehow, and they were claiming us, turning us into something else. Something monstrous. The guests weren't people, they were prisoners, trapped in those masks for God knows how long. And now they were coming for us. As the masked ones closed in, I felt my own costume begin to tighten, the fabric fusing with my skin. My mask, the fake vampire fangs I had glued to my mouth earlier, suddenly felt too real, digging into my gums, becoming part of me. I yanked at my cloak, trying to rip it off, but it wouldn't budge. The more I struggled, the more the costume seemed to tighten, like it was consuming me. Panic surged through me as the masked guests began to circle. Their lifeless eyes, peeking out from behind their grotesque disguises, watched me with eerie calmness. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest, but they followed. Silent. Unstoppable. I called out for help, but my voice was swallowed by the suffocating atmosphere of the mansion. The music had become slower, heavier, like a funeral march echoing through the dark corridors. I stumbled into a hallway, my breath ragged, my hands clawing at the mask that was now becoming part of my face. I turned a corner and found myself in a long, dimly lit room lined with mirrors. The reflections showed me what I didn't want to see. My face, once just painted with fake blood and fangs, had transformed. The mask of a vampire was no longer a costume. My eyes were hollow, glowing faintly red, and my skin was pale as death. The fangs were real now, sharp and protruding from my mouth, glistening in the faint light. Behind me, I saw the masked ones. They weren't walking anymore, they were gliding, their bodies moving unnaturally as they closed in, their masks twisting and distorting with every step. They looked less human the closer they came, their faces stretching, their eyes empty voids. Desperation took over. I smashed a mirror with my bare hands, hoping that breaking the reflection might break the spell. Glass shattered around me, and blood poured from the cuts in my skin, but the reflection didn't change. My face, this monstrous mask, remained the same, staring back at me with a sinister grin. That's when I heard the whisper. Faint at first, like it was carried on the wind, but growing louder with each passing second. Join us. It's already too late. The masked ones had stopped moving, just feet away from me now, their heads tilted unnaturally to the side, waiting. Waiting for me to succumb. To become one of them. I turned and ran again, down endless hallways that seemed to stretch on forever, the mansion warping and twisting around me. Every door I opened led to another room full of mirrors, more reflections of my new monstrous form. My friends were there, too, Jenna with her grotesque cat face, Eric with his skeletal mask, Mike and Tom, their eyes vacant behind their distorted faces. They were all there, trapped in the reflections, staring at me. They didn't move. They didn't speak. But I could feel their despair, their souls screaming from behind those hollow eyes. I wasn't sure how much longer I could run. My body was changing, the costume consuming me entirely, my mind slipping into a haze of fear and madness. I could feel the mask tightening, fusing with my skin, my thoughts becoming darker, more primal. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. You belong here now. I burst into the main ballroom, the place where the party had started. The masked ones were everywhere, standing still, watching me with those same eerie expressions. I collapsed to the floor, unable to fight anymore, the mask fully attached now, my fangs aching with hunger. The whispers in my head turned into a deafening roar, drowning out my thoughts. I looked up, and standing in the center of the room was the host, a figure dressed in black, their face hidden behind a mask that was more elaborate, more terrifying than the others. Their eyes glowed red, and I knew, deep down, that this was the one who had started it all. The master of the masks. The host extended a hand, beckoning me to stand. I tried to resist, but my body moved on its own, rising to my feet. I was no longer in control. As I stood before the host, I felt the last shred of my humanity slipping away. The masked ones surrounded me, their empty faces turned toward the host in reverence. And then, with a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, the host spoke. "Welcome to the masquerade. You are one of us now." The mask was fully fused to my face. My friends, too, were lost in the crowd, their souls trapped behind the cursed masks they wore. We were no longer people. We were part of the masquerade, prisoners of the masks, doomed to wander the halls of the mansion for eternity, waiting for the next group of unsuspecting fools to join our endless, silent party. As the host turned and disappeared into the shadows, I felt the overwhelming urge to watch, to wait, to welcome the next guests. Because now, I was one of the masked ones. And there was no escape. End of the story. Story 3. The Forgotten Guests. It was supposed to be the Halloween party of the century. The event was held at the sprawling Ashford estate, a mansion so old that locals believed it predated the town itself. No one knew much about the host, just that it was some eccentric millionaire who rented the place every Halloween to throw a massive, invite-only bash. My friends and I were lucky to snag invitations from a mutual acquaintance, and the promise of mystery and excess was too tempting to resist. The mansion was breathtakingly huge, with high vaulted ceilings, grand chandeliers, and a garden so vast it felt like it stretched into the woods forever. Each room was elaborately decorated, cobwebs, flickering candles, dark velvet curtains, and a strange, soft fog crept through the hallways. The party was already in full swing when we arrived, the air electric with excitement, but there was something more in the air. A tension I couldn't quite place. Everyone was in costume, and some were beyond impressive, realistic, disturbing. Masked with contorted faces, eyes too hollow, smiles stretched too wide. The guests wearing these masks were silent, blending into the atmosphere as they roamed from room to room. "Great costumes," Jenna said, adjusting her witch's hat, but her tone wasn't quite as casual as she meant it to be. "Yeah," I muttered, trying to shake off the sense that something was wrong. It was Halloween, I reminded myself. Everything was supposed to feel a little eerie. We mingled, danced, and drank for hours. The party seemed to grow more chaotic, the music louder, the laughter sharper, but a strange thing began to happen. The masked guests, the ones who had been watching from the sidelines, were increasing in number. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but as the night wore on, they seemed to multiply. They moved through the crowd, silent as shadows, their dead eyes peeking through the grotesque masks. I could feel them watching us, following our every move, though they never spoke, never interacted with anyone. There was something off about them, something deeply unsettling. By midnight, we were all unnerved. Tom had gone off to explore the mansion and hadn't returned for over an hour. Eric was growing restless, his eyes darting toward the masked guests, his breathing shallow. "This is weird," he muttered, gripping his drink tightly. "I'm gonna go find Tom." "Be careful," I said, but he was already gone. 15 minutes passed. Then 30. Eric didn't come back. We tried to reach him by phone, but the signal was dead. Jenna, Mike, and I decided we couldn't just wait. The mood of the party had shifted, what was once fun and exhilarating had become suffocating. The fog that rolled through the room seemed thicker now, and the temperature had dropped drastically. We split up to search for Tom and Eric, but soon, I was wandering the mansion alone. Every hallway looked the same, long and dark, with rows of doors that led to rooms I hadn't seen before. The guests, the ones in the twisted masks, seemed to be everywhere now, drifting through the halls in eerie silence. Their footsteps didn't make a sound, and the more I tried to avoid them, the more they seemed to appear in my path. I found myself in a dark corridor at the back of the mansion, the faint sound of a clock ticking in the distance. At the end of the hallway stood an old, ornate door, slightly ajar. Something compelled me to open it, and as I stepped inside, I found myself in a room that didn't fit with the rest of the mansion. It was dusty, abandoned, and smelled of decay. The walls were lined with portraits, faces of people, their eyes obscured, each one wearing a different mask. In the center of the room was a long dining table, covered in rotting food. Sitting at the table, frozen in place, were guests. They were still, like statues, each of them dressed in extravagant costumes with elaborate masks. But something about them wasn't right. They looked old. Ancient, even, as though they had been sitting there for years. I felt a jolt of horror as I recognized some of the faces: Eric, Tom, and Mike. Their masks were different now, more grotesque, their expressions locked and twisted, permanent grins. I screamed their names, but they didn't move. Their eyes were vacant, glassy, and behind their masks, they looked gaunt, drained of life. It was as if they had become part of the room, absorbed into the very walls. I stumbled back, heart racing, and turned to run, only to find the doorway blocked by one of the masked guests. I froze as they stepped forward, their mask a grotesque, grinning face with hollow eyes. Without saying a word, they lifted a silver mask from a nearby shelf and held it out to me. I stepped back. "What do you want?" I demanded, but they didn't respond. They just stood there, waiting. The air in the room was thick, stifling, and I realized what was happening. The guests, the ones in the masks, they weren't just partygoers. They were trapped. Forgotten. Cursed to stay in the mansion for eternity, waiting for new victims to take their place. And now, it was our turn. I backed away, my mind racing. I had to find Jenna, had to get out before it was too late. But the masked guest stepped closer, holding the mask out toward me. I could feel its pull, a strange, magnetic force that made my head spin. I couldn't look away. With every second that passed, I felt myself slipping. My limbs grew heavy, my thoughts foggy. It was like the mask was calling to me, demanding that I wear it. I could almost hear the whispers now, faint but insistent. "Join us. It's your turn now." I tried to resist, but the weight of the mansion, the presence of the masked guests, was too strong. My legs buckled beneath me, and I fell to my knees, staring at the silver mask in their hands. It was beautiful in a terrible way, gleaming in the candlelight, its expression locked in a horrifying smile. I couldn't fight it any longer. With trembling hands, I reached out and took the mask. As I lifted it to my face, I caught one last glimpse of the room, the frozen guests, the decaying food, the portraits on the walls. And then, as the mask sealed over my skin, everything went dark. I became one of them. Now, I wait. Wait for the next group of guests to arrive, to take their place at the eternal masquerade. Because the party never ends at Ashford Estate. And once you wear the mask, you're never allowed to leave. End of the story.